afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matanda Abubaker, and the Youth Roundtable is back with your weekly dose of sense. Last week, on the 20th of August 2021, on Friday, the Ugandan NGO Bureau came out and announced that 23 NGOs had their operations halted for failing to file returns and comply with the statutory regulations. 16 of those had not filed their audited books of account, and 15 had not registered, were operating as NGOs, but they had not registered with the Bureau. The executive director of the Bureau said that this is a move to sanitize the NGO environment, to ensure there is compliance, and to weed out dangerous groups that may compromise our national security and compromise our national values. The NGOs, on the other hand, were not very excited. Many of them have issued statements rebuking the actions of the NGO Bureau, stating that some stating that they are compliant, others stating that they operate as companies limited by guarantee, and therefore there is no need for them to register with the NGO. But it's just a witch hunt that is meant and shows the shrinking civic space in the country. At the same time as we are still looking at those, the country lost a Deputy Inspector General of Police, General Okech. At a time when everyone was expected to be mourning, there were some strange voices, some making videos, others writing articles, some sounding like they were celebrating the death of the soldier, the gallant soldier, and others just fell short of saying good riddance. So many questions were asked. Is this part of the moral degeneration we have always talked about as a country? Have our hearts grown darker? Is this part of the shrinking civic space? This is a form of citizens expressing their discontent because the alternative ways of them doing so have been shut. This is going to inform our discussion today. And on our panel, to break this down, we have Abel Eseru from ACFIM. Abel, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this space. It's a pleasure being around here.
Thank you, Abel. And a very close friend of the Youth Roundtable, Henry Otafiire, with the name that rings a bell. Henry is a research fellow with the GLISS, one of the the NGOs. I don't know if you're an NGO, or the companies limited by guarantee that were closed. Henry, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for hosting me this afternoon.
Yes. And Gloria Nabaye. Gloria is a research associate, still with GLISS, who is going to give us what's happening at GLISS and tell us what the pronouncement we see means. Perhaps they have closed. Maybe we should even stop introducing them as coming from GLISS. That is non-existent. Yes, it's a pleasure to have you, Gloria.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and about to become a regular at the Youth Roundtable is Moses Kidega. Moses Kidega represents the youth of GLU in the National Youth Council and serves on the National Executive as the Secretary, Labour Affairs, but is also a proud member of the NRM. Yes, Moses, thank you for visiting us again.
Thank you very much, Comrade Council, for having me once again. It's always a pleasure to be amidst fellow young people to discuss issues that are very pertinent to our country. Thank you for always having me.
So I'm going to start with you, Gloria. You are a research associate at GLISS. Does it still exist?
Oh, GLISS
we saw the executive director of the NGO Bureau calling upon all government agencies and everyone, the Ugandan population and agencies, to cooperate in ensuring that you don't operate. What's going on?
But because we are not breaking any law and we are within our legal means and our legal provisions, we are still operating as a company limited.
You are operating by defiance.
It's not defiance if I'm not breaking any law. We are law-abiding citizens and we are still practicing the law of the country Uganda. And for any other person that is contending, definitely you need to come and visit us and give us, prima facie of why you think we are defying.
Yeah, so the NGO Bureau is saying your operations have been halted because you have not registered with it, and yet you're holding out as an NGO. And if I can just share with you some information, there is a decision by Justice Sekana just at the end of last month that actually cemented this position, saying that so long as you're not for profit and you're a non-government organization, that brings you under the purview of the regulation of the NGO bill.
I'll make it easy for you. We sit at GLISS as 20 researchers. And our mandate, and we always say it, our mandate and business is that we think, write, and disseminate research. How you're going to stop that, whether you close those doors or open them, you know, virtue of the fact that I am a researcher, whether I have a location or I have an office, I still exist. So whenever they talk about GLISS as an entity, people miss the fact that GLISS is a consortium of thinkers. So while they will say stop operation, what operation? Should we sit back home and stop thinking? I don't get it, and a lot of people miss it from there, because while other NGOs will have things to do with community-based work, with outreaches, we don't have that. We sit to write and think better. We analyze policies. I don't know how you stop, as a citizen of Uganda, as first mandate, to stop thinking about the policies of your country and to stop thinking about the issues that matter to the citizens. You never have to stop. And even if I wasn't a researcher, I would still be a citizen, and I would still think, write, and disseminate.
Wow, interesting. I'll come back to you. Let me first go to Abel from ACFIM. Gloria sounds very defiant. And part of what she has described is what you do. I did not see on the list. It seems like you're complying, and therefore you're safe. What did you make of the actions of the NGO Bureau? Since you are not part of the victims, are you not telling your colleagues, the other civil society organizations, to do what you did?
Thank you so much, Comrade Matanda. I don't think it's that we are not part of the list. It's just, when they're targeting people, they first start with some.
Yeah, so your position is that these are just being targeted?
Yes, they start with some as they come for you also.
Yes.
But before, maybe I want first us to draw this from our own history. You know that as a country, when we got independence, we had a lot of political turbulence between 1962 up to around 1985.
Yes.
So when the current regime came into place...
Or 2006, Kidega will tell you.
Yes. When the current regime came into place and assumed power, they promised the country a lot of things. Fundamental change. They promised to restore freedoms and rights of citizens, and they also came up with a constitution, and that's one of the greatest achievements they made, according to me. And in that constitution, we have an entire chapter that talks about protecting, promotion, fundamental freedoms and rights of individuals or citizens.
Yes.
But now when we see again the same government trying to use the law to repress the activities of actors who have the right to form and associate among us themselves, because the constitution allows them that, I find it very strange, because if you went to the bush and fought to return the freedoms and restore the liberties of citizens, why do you again come and use the law which you promised to govern the country with, to repress as actors, which are helping you to ensure that you promote the rights and the liberties of the citizens in the country? So once you don't once the government is not bound by the law, I think we shall be degenerating back to the
what
days.
Rights, for example, are we talking about here?
I want us to look at it in terms of, are we able to associate as individuals? Are we able to assemble? Are we able to express ourselves? So I find it very strange whereby when civil society is trying to mobilize people to associate with other colleagues and maybe tell government you're wrong this side, there are some agencies of yours that are abusing the rights you enshrined in the constitution you're supposed to protect. So when they're calling the government to order and the government doesn't want to be bound by the laws they are put in place, that means we are sliding back to dark days.
Abel, are you suggesting that having rights in the constitution means that you're going to operate unregulated? Because, for example, if you have come together, the NGO Act of 2016 is telling you that you must file returns, show how much you've gotten and how you've spent it. You file it with the Bureau. If you don't, you cannot say your right is being violated, can you?
Of course, Matanda, I know civil society organizations have to comply by the law. But we also need to understand that there are certain civil society organizations that are being targeted, especially those that are doing work around governance.
Sure.
Those that are doing work around service delivery or service relief are not all that targeted. But when you look at these ones that are so vocal and call government to order, each time government violates the rights of citizens, they are the ones that are being targeted. So they come up with laws which are repressive to try and curtail the activities.
Sure.
And they term them as participating in activities as subversive. So I don't find it so
Okay, so you're
logical
saying
enough.
there are some organizations being targeted, and they're targeted not just by this action on Friday, but systematically within the law.
Yes.
The constitution you talked about of 1995 provides avenues for you to challenge a law. You don't challenge it by not complying. There is a process of doing so. Why have they not taken that avenue if there are laws that you think are repressive?
I don't think the civil society actors have not taken that avenue. Right now, what I know the civil society leaders are planning to do, they are planning to engage first of all with the government, as they also use the mechanism within the law to ensure that the government should not use the law to curtail them, yet they can also use the very law to defend themselves.
Okay, thank you. Let me first run to Moses. Moses, you're a member of the NRM, a very proud member. And already we have had holes being punched into your legacy. Among the things that took the gallant soldiers to the bush was the idea of liberty, freedom, and they style themselves as freedom fighters and revolutionaries. And what better freedom than freedom to assemble, freedom to express yourself? And so the actions of the NGO Bureau, for example, and the other actions, we have not even mentioned those of the security agencies and freezing accounts, the Financial Intelligence Authority. All these, people are saying, it seems you're going back on your word, the very things for which you purport to have fought, you're going against. But also, as an executive member of the National Youth Council, I put it to you that so many of the organizations that were closed belong to young people. It's young people trying to organize. So with all the challenges we see in this country, for many of whom we can say government has failed to solve, why again clamp down on people who are trying to use alternative ways of organizing, like civil society, to deal with the challenges?
Thank you very much, Comrade Council. I think moving forward into this discussion, we must appreciate that Uganda is a growing democracy. And that fact alone means that we shall have challenges along the way. But even having that at the back of our mind, I am moved to quote Professor Welch of Cambridge University, who one time said that democracies are not only about going into elections. It's about the Bill of Rights. It's about the freedom to organize, the freedom to press. So partially I agree with what Comrade Eseru is saying, that these are rights of citizens that must be upheld. These are values that should be able to bring us together as a country. But you see, it is also the responsibility of all stakeholders to build this democracy. The urge or the responsibility to build democracy in a country does not only lie on government, but civil society has to play a role, as well as government, as well as other political actors have to play their responsibilities and roles. You see, I want to take us back to Egypt, that later on we saw what they termed as the Muslim Brothers, which was a religious, social, and political movement. Now, the Muslim Brothers came to place because there was a crackdown in the civic space in Egypt, okay? Human beings, by their nature, are always going to try to organize themselves, either in civic spaces or in political spaces or in even economic and social spaces. So when the Egypt government cracked down on civil spaces, the people then began to organize in churches and mosques. So whereas the civic spaces were cracked in the public scene, the Egyptians then resorted to organize in mosques. And that is where we saw the rise of the Muslim Brothers. That was in 1928, and the leader then was Hassan al-Banna. So you can see that the more you crack down on this civic space, you are creating more radical and more defiant group of people. So I think what needs to be done is that the civil space needs to be incorporated. the non-government organizations need to be incorporated.
What do you mean by incorporated?
Incorporated in terms of socio-economic development.
Okay, of the country, yes.
Of the country, because we all know that government in its capacity is limited, both in terms of human resource, in terms of financial resource, among other limitations. So service delivery at times is championed or is extended through non-government organizations and the private sector. So moving forward, I don't agree with the notion that that civic society needs to be clamped down on. But also,
do you admit that this is happening?
Before I admit, I also think that, because I mentioned earlier that
Yes.
it is the responsibility of us all to build this democracy in Uganda.
Yes.
So if you register your NGOs, because there are some NGOs that are not very honest in their doings, they register, for example, as an NGO that maybe is for the girl child, but then what they do actually is different.
Are you sure? Do you have
Yes,
an example?
I would simply need to check in my records, but there are some non-government organizations
Tell us one.
that have separate objectives compared to what they're actually doing. So I think
that issue did come up, though.
I
in
think
the communication of
non-government
the-
organizations need to be honest in their dealings. And if government, through its intelligence, gets to realize that, for example, this NGO is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, then I believe there are rules and procedures on how to deal with them. You know, I don't think they should. I don't think closure is the ultimate solution, but rather there are legal and constitutional procedures to follow. Take them to court, let them answer for the queries that are being alleged against them.
So precisely, you also think the actions of the NGO Bureau on Friday were high-handed and unnecessary?
I think they skipped procedure.
Okay.
They jumped procedure. They should have taken the legal framework. What does the law say? If the NGOs that, for example, are operating out of context, what does the law say? That is where we should stand on the legal framework, on what does the Constitution speak about how to deal with NGOs in such circumstances.
But the NGO Bureau is not the first time we're hearing from them. They have been issuing warnings for over almost a year, saying, comply, register, file returns. Don't you think that that's fair enough?
Well, because it's them who are saying that the NGOs who are being targeted are politically oriented. So is it the political NGOs that have not been filing tax returns only? You see. So you get to realize that there is a political question in between. But I don't want us to dwell on the political aspect. I want us to dwell on the legal aspect. That whether an NGO fails to file their annual tax returns or monthly, whether an NGO operates contrary to what their objectives stipulate, there should be procedures by law on how to deal with these NGOs. Not you coming out to pronounce yourself and say, now we are closing you, without giving them a fair chance of hearing.
Okay, thank you. Let's first hear from Henry, then I'll come back to you. Henry, in 2016, the law regulating NGOs in this country was amended. And by that amendment, a number of obligations were created for NGOs. Part of them was that it's compulsory to register as a company limited by guarantee. And then from that level, as a lawyer, I did not understand why, because if you have registered a company limited by guarantee, you then are a legal entity and can do anything. But there's a requirement that then, and it appears now compulsory, you register with the NGO Bureau. Now, registering with the NGO Bureau attracts further obligations, including being listed as an accounting entity with the Financial Intelligence Authority. So, if I'm going to file returns with URSB, file returns with the NGO Bureau, file returns with the Financial Intelligence Authority, have audited books, and this whole string of obligations, how many organizations in Uganda are able to pull off such a thing in a year? And what does this mean? And they're saying, you know, this is not a jungle. It's a country organized. We need to know what's going on. What's your take?
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Before I answer your question, I need to provide a contextual background of our conversation.
Thank you.
About shrinking civic space. People who, like us, who work in the policy arena, we look at what they call global or regional trends. The issue of shrinking civic space is not a strange phenomenon. It has been happening over a decade now. And if you look at not only Uganda, if you look at Kenya, you look at Burundi, and Tanzania, we have had similar incidents that have tried to gag and suffocate civic space. There are many examples I can give, but over time, we have seen that when they say shrinking, it means the space has been there, not large, but
Yes.
it has been shrinking, just like glaciers at Mount Rwenzori. So I think it is to do with the democratic trajectory of countries. I've been reading a report called by Freedom House. It says Freedom of the World Report. It normally gives rankings of countries all over the world on how they are performing on democratic credentials. And it is not surprising they are saying it's only West Africa, I'm talking about Africa now.
Yes.
It's only West Africa where countries like Ghana, maybe Nigeria, they have had some incremental gains in democracy. Yet in countries in sub-Saharan Africa like Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, they have had major democratic setbacks in the sense that these are countries which had a promising trajectory of democracy, or maybe 1990s to 2000, but when it came to early 2000s, there has been like a reversal. So what we are dealing right now is works that have been there for over time. It just does not happen overnight. So, and then when I come to your question of are all NGOs supposed to comply, I think we all agree that legally, if you are a law-abiding citizen and organization or entity, you are obligated to observe your laws of a country. But the problem becomes, like, if they have issued a list of 54 NGOs,
Yes.
and the issues are like three. Some have not been filing tax returns. Others have expired licenses.
Yes.
Others are operating like NGOs, but they are not NGOs.
Yeah,
And this is my organization which I work with. GLISS is one organization which has been a regular victim when it comes to
They're shrinking.
shrinking of a space. We have had a break-in before in 2017 at the height of the Tojikwata Co. We were raided, equipments were taken, documents were taken, and then some have never been returned. Of course, accounts frozen by Financial Intelligence Authority, saying that there were issues to do with money laundering. But the problem is that whenever these allegations are brought up and you're shut down or you're inconvenienced, at the end of the day, they will never present the evidence to show that you have committed this. So it is not really surprising when you say that this is witch hunt. And then if you look at, like recently, at the beginning of this year, we had staff from NGO Bureau who came purporting to do their constitutional mandate, supervision, monitoring. When they reached, they said, why don't you have a signpost? We said, that's how we operate. But I don't think under the law you're required to have a signpost as long as you're registered. Then they said, can we take, actually they didn't ask us, they were taking photos. Then we say, why are you taking photos? Said, oh no, this is our role we are doing as NGO Bureau. So we protested and they had to go back. So when we saw the letter this time, the letter was saying, you shut down with immediate effect. There wasn't any consultation, there wasn't any engagement. Because if, I mean, an NGO Bureau may have a mandate to execute its role, but the intention, which may be in good faith, may be seen as suspect or unfair or taken in good faith if you don't engage people. Because this was abrupt. They came and said we are shutting down without giving you reason why they are actually they were saying that for us we're an NGO, but we're not an NGO. And we have had that back and forth argument of them framing us as an NGO, yet we are not an NGO. So what they are saying, yes, the law may be saying if you are a company limited by a guarantee I think it's a legal lacuna. They are saying you're under the purview of supervision of the NGO Bureau. But if you are just under URSB and you're fighting with URSB, you have no obligation whatsoever with the NGO Bureau. So they are saying that you come and register by force, and so that we can monitor you now, so that we can subject you to our own processes. So I think it becomes like targeting, because maybe I can say there are many NGOs which are incorporated as companies limited by guarantee, but they have not been, sanctioned, maybe because...
You should whistleblow.
So...
Okay, yeah, thank you, Henry. I'll now go to Abel. Abel, you brought this whole idea of witch hunt or targeting, but in your submission, you also, hinted on our turbulent history as a country. Government says, it's very easy if you leave civic organizing to be formless and shapeless. It's very easy for us to relapse back into instability, because there can be illicit financial flows, there can be illegal organizing and mobilizing, and you now have new challenges, global challenges like terrorism, and we don't live in a very secure sub-region. On all our borders, people are baying for blood. So, is it not justified that because of that history that you raised, that the state actors need to be on the lookout and very alert for groups that are organizing and for the flows of money? They would rather err, on the side of caution than be sorry when the country is no more.
Thank you, Martin. I think I don't think that by shrinking our civic space as civil society, you're going to, by shrinking civic space, I don't think that's the best way of trying to curtail maybe instability or what, because there are various indicators that cause instability. First of all, if you have a government that is itself repressive in nature and trying to maybe violate the rights of citizens, even if citizens don't civically organize, but the pressure will keep on piling on them, and they get irritated by some of the actions that government is doing, and they themselves can mobilize. The very best way our brother here, Kidega, told you, you may block us from this side of civil society and say you don't want us civically organized. We shall look for another alternative route of where we can go and organize ourselves and come up and what? Fight some of the repressive policies you're putting in place or actions you're trying to implement. So and on the issue of money laundering and what, of course I do know any government does not need to have money that comes without it knowing where it's coming, what is it doing. So it's good for government to always monitor how money comes into the country and what is it being used for. And I know they have the Financial Intelligence Authority. So if they have it, it must be robust in the way it's doing its operations. But we shouldn't say that organizations that are doing work on areas of governance are the ones that are always targeted. For example, look at let's say use elections, which is one of the pillars of democracy. Prior to elections, how many civil society organizations were halted? Their accounts were what? Were frozen.
Because there are queries and there are accountable persons.
Have they brought those queries up? How far have they reached with their investigations on those organizations? So you don't need to first wait for something to come and then say this one and this one is likely to maybe engage in some subversive activities. Then you say, without even you having credible evidence on what the action you're trying to take, you're just suspicious. This organization is likely to receive money and maybe finance this political party or what. That doesn't make sense. You have to have a robust system that helps you to conduct your intelligence and come up with some things that are credible enough, because you might take an action which can backfire on your side.
Yeah, but we have heard from the Financial Intelligence Authority, because they were put on the spot. And I think about 2 days ago, they came out and said by the time they recommend to the Uganda Police Force that, look here, they have credible intelligence, but they don't act on their own, so they share that information with the security agencies to do further work. And so they are saying, one, we don't act without reasonable suspicion, and suspicion is enough for a security agency to set its hand in motion Two, they are saying if there is no follow-up, following through, that's another whole question altogether. But first, you cannot take our mandate to raise the issue.
Of course, they should not take away their mandate, but of course, you saw after the elections, those organizations that their accounts were frozen. What happened? The same government, through its own institutions, had to let the organization resume operations. So we ask ourselves, was it only targeted for election period, or it was just, that's why we always say it, maybe it's witch hunt. They say, maybe you're going to awaken organized citizens and awaken their civic consciousness so that they can be able to know that, to make rational decisions maybe during election time. So they say, if this organization is the one going to champion that, and they are going to get this money, why don't we clamp it down and wait for the election process to get done, and they resume their operation? So I think government needs to, as our comrade said, we need to find ways of working together to develop our nascent democracy. Because if we only leave it to government, I don't think government has all enough resources to build this country and push it to another level where we all wish to stay in a country which is free, peaceful, and with more stability, whereby everyone is happy and prosperous in its own in the country.
Okay, thank you to Gloria. You, in your opening remarks, you sounded very defiant, and you know, you seemed, much as you deny that's not by defiance, but you seem to say, you know, they can go to hell. We are not what they are saying, and that's their problem. And so I'm just wondering what's the way forward, because we have seen statements from some of the organizations on that list. Some are saying they were compliant, this must have been a mistake, and so they have responded to the Bureau. Some, I suppose some that are quiet are putting their houses in order and maybe complying. On your end, and maybe what you would advise, because here everyone is following and listening in, if I'm a young person, for example, who wants to run an NGO, what do I do? And you did say that GLISS, for example, does not go to the community and all that. What if I want to go to the community? What do I do? Do I have to comply, or is there an alternative?
Thank you very much. And I think I don't want us to miss the highlight of our conversation, that is shrinking civic space, or give ourselves a false hope that if we, in any case, comply to all the rules and regulations, the rules of the game would still apply. We exist in what we can officially call a quasi-dictatorial state. And to imagine that democracy or level-headed reason is going to take the day is something that I don't want us to lie to ourselves, especially as youth, because then we need to see beyond now to be able to project what the future might look like for us as civil society. And I also don't want to zero down civic space to just organizations, even when they are the point, the spotlight where it is right now is on them.
Yes.
But to realize that dissent can look like political parties that are weak and they can no longer operate on any day as political parties, yet we are in a multi-party democracy. It can look like arresting activists, politically sound activists who are out there pushing for the narrative to change. It can look like surveillance. It can look like very many different things. And so in this moment, it looks like a clamp on civil society organizations. What does that mean for a person who wants to join the civic space and wants to engage? I don't want us to believe that, you know, NGO work zeroes down to only community-based service. But it's multifaceted. There are people who are in democracy, there are people who are in governance, there are people who are in research strictly. And the idea of civil society is that it brings the people. It is the voice where the people can sit and find their voice and gapping and you know, find the level space to be able to advocate for issues that matter to them. And so to be in a reality where we have a deliberate clamp is to reduce the avenues for citizens to be able to engage. So it is not about organizations, and I don't want us to take that as our take home for today, that it is about organizations, but it's about the citizen. Is a citizen able to, you know, articulate their issues? Civil society stands in the gap as the advocate for the people. Once civil society shrinks or disappears or is obsolete, the people lose a voice. So continuously, when we are talking about these things, I don't want us to imagine that there is a vacuum somewhere that is called organizations, but these organizations represent the people.
Yeah,
So
okay, if I can, you have made that point even in your first submission.
Yes.
When you're defining GLISS. I had that point of saying, you see, GLISS is not just that entity. We are researchers, and I want to bring some realities to you. Number one, that some persons, both legal and natural, came together late last year and formed something called New You. Yeah, just coming together to, to push certain things that advance electoral democracy in Uganda. And the NGO Bureau clamped on them and closed them, and court agreed with them in the decision I described of CCG versus the Attorney General. But in the explanation, they were saying, whereas these people are defining themselves as a loose coalition, it looked like they even had a secretariat, they had a headed paper, they were behaving like a legal entity. And so, whereas you're saying it goes beyond an organization, is it not a reality that for you to open an account, for you to access some funding from some donors, for you to communicate coherently as an entity and have some sort of leadership, you actually need an organization, and that's where the light is.
I hear you, and I understand where you're coming from. But the death of institutions doesn't start with, the formality of laws and all those things. And like I said, I don't want us to be, aloof to the realities of our times. This is not normal programming. We are not a democracy as we want to believe. And if we were, we are, if anything, a quasi-autocracy. And in autocratic regimes, despots play the systems and play the rules. Today, we cannot wake up and say the shrinking space is a legal problem. It is a political problem in itself and in everything that it presents. And we are not going to address it with legal means. We've chosen that it will not work, because where you're going to take your redress is a system of President Museveni and the NRA regime. So to imagine that we are going to play with the rules that abide with the law and use them to, create a narrative change or to push or to advocate for democracy is to say that play by the rules and make sure you keep quiet. Let the autocrat lead the way. So while we talk about, please apply, please comply, please, file your returns, I want us to be alive and aware to the realities of where we stand in time and why we push and why we, put government on accountabilities, on the accountability status, and why we do the things we do, why we push for better governance, because there is no governance in the moment that speaks to the people of Uganda. So for whatever cause or whatever action these organizations will take, if it stands to going to the courts of law, there will be no justice there, and I don't want us to lie to each other. If it's to file with the NGO Bureau, the Chapter 4 had filed to its T and still was closed. So I don't want us to think it is about filing returns and about being a legal entity, but more or less reducing the space in which we organize. New You, as loose as a coalition it was standing in the mandate as citizens of Uganda coming together to push and, observe the elections. And it is in their mandate as citizens, and I want us to agree that it is in their mandate as citizens. And for any case, the result in court was not that it was to, I think when CCG filed, was to put it on record that we went to the courts of law, and this was the decisions of the courts of law. In any case, when we look back as we, document and, go through this season as a quasi autocracy, it is good for us to look back and have, documentation of how far we went and how far we lost. Actually, the civic space shrinks, we are coming to a place where it will be obsolete. We have 54 organizations out. A few years back, we had 12,000 organizations at the forefront of being closed. Today we are speaking 54.
And the Bureau are saying there are about 2,000.
Yes. And today we are
Operating.
speaking 54. But these 54 speak to something. They are politically, you know, ingrained in their work. They are, you know, they are pushing for governance. They are pushing for democracy. They are pushing for human rights, issues that matter in the now. And so going forward as citizens and all people that want to enter this space is to come to the reality that now we see where we are. So how do we build better? How do we organize better? Thank God for the digital spaces. I mean, if Civic Space, apparently if Civic Space was registered under the UCC, I highly doubt any of our engagements here would be allowed to air. And that is also one of the things that happens in a quasi-democracy, that even the media, the free media is clamped on. The fourth estate is shrunk, and then the autocrat starts to, to navigate the way of sending out information and sending out media engagements that speak for himself and push for the regime's stay. So let's be alive to these things without, sugarcoating whether it is a legal laws or it's what. We are in a time where the times have changed, and we are becoming alive to these things.
Thank you, Moses. You say you're a proud member of the NRM. The nouns and verbs and pronouns being used here don't sound very attractive. I'm hearing words like quasi-autocrat, quasi-democracy, very many years into what was initially described as being part, a new breed of leaders, a very promising constitution, a progressive constitution in the region and acting like a model. I don't hear that in the descriptions that are coming through. And earlier on you have noted that when you close the civic space, you open up for dangerous avenues, some of them that trick of violence. But I have also heard the government side saying, for example, that many of these organizations are not accountable. They are getting funding from suspicious sources, from imperialists, and they have no clear work on ground, which try to suggest, contrary to what you're saying, that government does not look at these organizations as partners in development. So I need you to speak to these two realities. One of this description, quasi-autocrat, quasi-democracy. Let's not pretend, Gloria has called us out, not to pretend that we're operating in a normal situation. What's going on?
Thank you, comrade, once again. At the heart of the national resistance movement revolution was a pillar of democracy.
Was? Okay.
Was a pillar of democracy because that is a past tense, okay? But it still is a very fundamental principle of the national resistance movement that I proudly subscribe to. There is something called liberal versus illiberal democracies. I agree that our democracy, that our democracy is not where it has to be, but we have made progress compared to where we picked this country from to where it is right now. There has been steady progress. But also, we must address our minds.
No, we need to hear some of that progress. You can't just throw it there.
One of them mentioned that it is under the NRM that we saw a constitution.
There was several constitutions, actually.
But Amin ruled by decree, and you know that.
But he overthrew a constitution.
Anyway, the point is, when the NRM took over the governance of this country,
yes,
we saw a country that has a constitution with a Bill of Rights. Okay. A constitution that upholds the values of its citizens. A constitution where in its first chapter it gives power to the citizens of this country.
Constitution, point made.
Yes.
What other?
So the argument I'm trying to make here is that we may not be where we want to be as a country democratically, but there has been progress, which we must appreciate. Before you cut me short, I was still explaining to you what we call liberal versus illiberal democracies.
Yes.
And I agree that what we should be championing is the liberal democracy, where there is freedom to press, there is freedom to organize, there are human rights values that are being appreciated and upheld, and that is what all of us should be struggling towards. You see, there is something called the state, and I've heard some of us mention it. You see, according to Kenneth Waltz, a state is a political entity that is characterized by two things. It must have a territory and there must be sovereignty, okay? And when citizens elect a government and empower it with the tools of state, they enter a social contract with its government and the people. And I think both sides of the coin must religiously contribute towards this harmonious social contract between the two. What makes a state are, to me, four things. One, the ability to collect what we call taxes and to spend it in a way that benefits the country. Two is the aspect of security, the power to control the security aspects of the country in a way that protects the lives and property of the citizens. Okay? Thomas Hobbes one time said that when citizens should be able to, at a point T, relinquish their rights and their freedoms to the state in return for protection and security. Okay? So when the state at times acts in a way it acts, I want to believe that they do so in protection of the rights and liberties and freedoms of citizens. Because, like I said, there are some NGOs whose actions could be questioned. And I will not go ahead to cite them on camera, but I believe that the government and the state, in its nature, through its intelligence, gathers all this information. So when they come out to act the way they do, I believe they do so making reference to the four fundamental aspects of the responsibilities of a state.
So far you have had two?
Yes, the third, which is, of course, the legitimacy. That what constitutes a state is that the people must give it the legitimacy. That's why we go through elections every 5 years or 4 years, whatever the constitution says, depending on the country. And the fourth, which is really skipping my mind, is Anyway, but
yeah, we can
yes,
it out.
You can see that there are four very important aspects that gives the state the power and the mandate to do certain things. But you see, this whole NGO debate to me is sort of, I don't want to say misguided, but we are having it from two different fronts. I think that what needs to be done is that these NGOs, as they constitute themselves, they come up with objectives that are clearly stipulated.
Yes.
And in all honesty, this should form the bedrock and the fulcrum on which these NGOs operate. The state comes in to act aggressively or to sanction order among these NGOs when they feel that these NGOs are operating contrary to what they presented as their core objectives. So I think there needs to be a balance struck between the two. But like I said earlier on, it is important for this space to grow because in its growth, we nurture the democracy of the country. Like I said, the more you clamp down on this space, people will always find means of organization. The Muslim Brotherhood organization eventually took over power. They eventually defeated the regime that was clamping on this space under Hosni Mubarak. So it is foolhardy for us to believe that the government can operate in isolation without other entities, in this case, the non-government organizations, entity or fraternity. I think the two need to coexist for the growth and development of the socio-economic and political aspirations of this country. But it is not right for my colleagues to use words like autocracy and to use words that really depict the National Resistance Movement government as one that has no moral fiber for respect of human rights. Yet we are the same people that instituted the same. So we can discuss the spirit of constitutionalism, yes, but I think as a party, we have managed to institute in place a document that should be able to work for the citizens of this country. But what comes in shortly is the implementation, which is the lack of the spirit of constitutionalism.
You're saying the NRM does not have the spirit of
the implementers.
Who is the NRM now? It's the
regime
in power.
No. When people are recruited into security, they are not recruited based on their political parties. So the state in itself has people from all divides.
But when people are recruited into security, they are commander-in-chief. is a chairperson of a given party and a candidate of a given party, and therefore they execute a mandate.
That is true,
Oh,
but,
yes.
but we all know that there are individual actions that are taken at an individual level and are not sanctioned by the commander-in-chief.
So, for example, okay, we are talking about security. So could we say some of the excesses we see
The
are
excesses,
not sanctioned?
yes.
And when they are not sanctioned, what happens?
That is why we have such officers being lined up in the court-martial. Haven't you seen them being
No, I
lined up
haven't.
before?
I've actually seen
Which
them
country
being
do you know?
praised.
Which country do you live in?
I've seen them
When
in,
the
on the
LDUs,
18th.
when the LDUs caned women in, was it Gulu? Weren't they sanctioned before the court-martial? Weren't they dealt with? Weren't they remanded to Luzira?
And taken for retraining?
Yes, but you see, there was a step was taken
Okay.
to deal with that.
Thank you very much. We are going to go for a short break, and when we come back, we are going to dive deeper and bring the second dimension of the discussion. I hope that we are learning, and I invite you to make comments on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, ask your questions, and inform us on how we can better this conversation. Thank you.
The Citizens Chatroom happens every Friday at 2 p.m. on Civic Space TV Online on Facebook and YouTube. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Civic Space TV, freedom always.
Yes, welcome back from the break. And without much ado, we are going to dive back into the discussion. There are scholars who have argued, and Kidega here hinted on it, that terrorism and instability is actually also a form of civic space. It's also a form of citizens engaging and organizing. And just on Saturday, unfortunately, the country woke up to the news of the passing of the Deputy Inspector General, General Lokech. And to many people, moments like that, moments when people have died, moments when a country has lost a person at that level. And in some societies, people who have fought in other countries for their countries, sometimes called veterans, they are celebrated, they are respected, and when they pass, it is felt in the country. To the contrary here, there were very mixed reactions. Some people recorded, some young people I should say, recorded videos, you know, short of saying good riddance. Some people wrote dossiers, also just falling short of saying good riddance. This started a conversation of saying, where is our conscience? Some of these actions actually go counter to our cultural context. What has happened? Have our hearts darkened? Have we lost our conscience? And some people are saying, no, this is unacceptable. Yet there are also those who are saying, no. You see, when people are oppressed, you cannot control how they react to things. Some people have also lost people at the hands of security operatives, and like they always say, there's nothing you can tell them. In fact, they would be happy if all of them in quotes are wiped. We want to put this in context of the shrinking civic space and try to understand what has gone wrong with us and what can we do as a country to get out of this. And I'm going to start with you, Henry. You did not have any kind words for the system. You seem to agree with Gloria with the quasi-autocratic words, quasi-democracy. And therefore maybe you're one of those who would be happy if the guarantors of such a system are passing away. What's your take?
Not necessarily having not good opinions about the government, but sometimes, you know, when you state facts as they are, you're framed as anti-government. Many people who just views as just as neutral and objective as they are, but back to your question on seeming polarization, of either you're saying when one camp people are celebrating, others are in a somber mood. It goes back to, if you've been following events of this country, you realize that it has been a constant trend, and we need to understand why has that come about. I think it's a renowned lawyer Mbanga who said that Uganda is a country which has lost a central nervous system, that we no longer feel each other's pain. Like Uganda as a body politic is so disjointed. Like, if you remember in Kasese, when you had those Kasese massacre, it was a Kasese affair. Remember when the riots here in November last year? It was a Uganda urban affair. So we have had
When landslides happen to my people in Bududa,
yes.
people keep telling me, why can't you people leave?
So
very insensitive.
You find yourself, why have Ugandans failed to agree on issues that should really be unifying them? I think it speaks of our politics, maybe, because I would want to understand rather than to become quick to judge those who are celebrating where they're coming from. Maybe I could say we have issues of political and economic exclusion that some segment of society has felt has been suffocated, and then as a way of shedding anger or displacing anger, celebrating a man like Rokech, whom would say has been a distinguished public servant who has been executing his role as a public servant, becomes a victim in such circumstances. So I think it is a question of, we need to ask, why has our moral conscience, our central nervous system collapsed so irredeemable that we no longer feel each other's pain? That's the question we need to ask.
Yeah, but maybe, I don't know whether this is still blamed on the central nervous system, but particularly for General Okech, I expected something else. I know that he commanded 2 missions in Somalia, and in some countries, like the United States, people who go to fight in other countries, of course, the implication is that they are fighting for our interests. They are revered, they are celebrated, but at least maybe for the others who are just internal actors. But for someone who had successfully done the country proud on the continent, and you would say global scene, how come this legacy does not seem to be?
Well, I think the point is here is that I know there are many people who not necessarily subscribe to NRM, but are very comfortable and really agree on Uganda's mission in South Sudan, or rather in Somalia or in South Sudan, wherever. As long as, because we all understand that this mission is really built on good intentions. We want to pacify our neighbors and have a stable region. The problem comes where you find a man like Rokech, who has been doing his job well, and now he is brought into a mix of deployed in an institution like police, which I think of course we have had many deployments of people from the army into. It has been a trend of
which is
militarizing Uganda police, which ideally and considered should be a civilian institution with people with civilian backgrounds. So if a man with that good record comes home and joins an institution with a tainted image and makes statements like, if you protest, you should write your wills before you protest.
Yeah, because he has been putting terrorists out of action.
So if a man if a family whose member was killed in November riots sees the man who said, if you protest, you should write your will and we shall kill you, and he celebrates, I think you would need to understand where that man or that person is coming from. So it's a dilemma of working in having a military man serving under a civilian institution, using militant methods and tactics. So it becomes quite complicated.
Okay, thank you. I will come to you, Abel. I have also observed that whereas he said this is something that has been constant, I don't think it's constant. I think people actually respond to different deaths differently. In the recent past, we have had 2 generals who died. The responses were not the same. they were different. Or I don't know, is it the position where you're standing from? Could it be that this is a way of the Ugandan society holding people accountable individually for their actions? Or is it a general thing? Because the responses are different for every individual, don't you think? What's your take about this whole thing of dancing on people's graves?
First of all, may the soul of the fallen general rest in peace. He has been someone who was good to our country, did this service diligently, and may his soul rest in peace. I think to me the whole issue goes back to our morals as a country. We are suffering with the problem of moral decay currently, because we have institutions that are supposed to build our morals, like the family, the schools, the churches, but you find that some of these institutions are also not performing their duties very well, because maybe you find that for example, right now during this COVID pandemic, most churches have been closed, most schools have been closed, but also it comes back to why is it that we're having this moral decay. I think it's all about, it relates around still the inequalities within the society we live in. So some people get frustrated because maybe the youth, for example, you say the youth, majority of them are unemployed, and you find that because they sometimes look up to government to come into place and try to address some of the unemployment challenges they face. Government does not respond each and every time, but each time they maybe go to the street to show their dissatisfaction, government comes into play and try to arrest some of them and put them behind the bars. So you find that some of the persons who are in the security forces become victims of such anger. So when maybe you attack the youth who are trying to maybe demonstrate and ask for demand from government to address their issues, and government doesn't respond positively but only responds using force to quell off those demonstrators. So some people who are operating in the system or in the security forces may die and they become victims. These people take it as celebration. For example, you saw what happened during elections. Many young people were shot and killed, so they look at people in the security system as their enemies now. So it goes back to still some of the issues the actions government takes. So if government responds to issues of citizens positively, I don't think we shall have such things happening.
Okay, thank you. Now to you, Kidega. Before you go to Gloria, you've had various reasons have come up trying to justify these actions of celebration, from us not having a central nervous system, quoting Council Mpanga, to, the failings of the state, to moral decadence. You have been in power, it's now coming for decades. Is this what you have pretended over, or is there more?
You see, in the feudal system of governance, where we had chiefs and kings, each time warriors from the kingdom would go to fight on behalf of the kingdom, whenever they would return victorious, the king would award them with women, the king would award them with silver and gold. Same applies to the 1788 to 1799 Napoleon Wars. Every French soldier who went to the battlefield to fight in the French Revolution, when they returned, they were given silver, they were given gold, among other forms of honor. These were symbols of appreciation, symbols of honor, symbols to say thank you for serving your country, symbols to say we are indebted to you. So you look at the personality of the now rest in peace General Paul Lokech, someone who offered himself to fight and defend this country and went as far as defending the region. You see, when he fought or led a mission in Somalia against terrorism of Al-Shabaab, that terrorism could have escalated to even Uganda.
It actually did in 2010.
It did escalate. But because the mission was led with precision, with wisdom by our general,
Courage.
Of course now the late, we managed to condense that kind of insurgents that could have escalated to Uganda. So I think such a man deserves to be given a state, first of all, a state burial. He deserves to be honored. And when I see young people making shipping statements, to me, it's very sad. This is someone who deserves to be honored. But you see, this speaks to the greater socio-economic challenges that we are having as a country. Really, there is death of decorum. You know, we can disagree, okay? But how we disagree matters a lot. And I agree with my colleagues when they say that this frustration has been building over time. I think it was with you when sometime we discussed about the Moi dictatorship in Kenya that only escalated or was witnessed about 10 years later in the 2007 post-election violence. This was frustration that was building in the Kenyan population under the Moi dictatorship that later showcased itself between the Mwai Kibaki and Raila Odinga group. So I think as a country, we need to reflect. To me, I think this is a point of reflection. It's a point of digesting what haven't we done, or where have we gone wrong?
For who? For the leadership or everyone?
You see, the moment we begin to classify society, that some problems should only be solved by the leaders and some should be dealt with by the people, I think that's where we lose the point.
Because if I can bring in some historical context, maybe especially relating to the group in charge, maybe you have not always been like this. I am told, I was not there, but I'm told in 1986, they were received in Kampala with dancing and fanfare. What happened?
Like I told you, we are not exactly where we want to be. And maybe as a regime or as a party, we are falling short in terms of implementing the principles and the 10 points program for which we, of course not we, I was not part, but for which our but for which our forefathers decided that enough is enough and we shall do whatever it takes to liberate this country. I think it's a point of reflection and cross-examination to say, yes, we set out to do ABCD, have we really achieved it? And if not, what has limited us? So I think, back to the context of this matter, the death of General Paul Lokech, to me, should rather make the country sober more than laugh. Because you see, at a time when we are expecting 2,000 refugees from Afghanistan, we all know its history and its background. We know that it is an area dominated by terrorism, and we are expecting such people in our country. We would have loved to take advantage of the expertise of General Paul Lokech in sieving and in incorporating these Afghan refugees into our country. But now here we are.
But with due respect, I find your remarks quite unfair, especially describing refugees. You know, we have been described, Uganda has been described like that as an area, by the way, including by President Arap Moi, as an area that is wrought of instability and terrorism. And don't you find it problematic?
But am I lying about Afghanistan?
Hold it. Don't you find it problematic that you're condemning an entire people because they live in a space where there is terrorism? In Uganda here, we have people from Somalia, for example, that's unstable. Nigeria, northern Nigeria, is unstable. But you wouldn't just blanketly say, because this one is from Somalia, then, you know, I find that a bit disturbing.
No, I think we have to discuss the realities of the matter as it is right now. Afghanistan is a country that has been at war for more than 20, 25 years,
Sure.
if we are to count, okay? The aspect of violence...
Just like we were as a people, does that make us...
No, but we were in war more than 35 years
Actually,
ago.
let me bring it home. You come
More
from
than 35 years
you
ago.
come from Gulu in northern Uganda, where my whole childhood, in primary, I was hearing of the LRA war going on there. Do you think, would you be comfortable with someone condemning you, or
you see,
discriminating
I
you
get
in
your
essence
point.
because you come from
I
an
get your
area
point.
that was unstable?
I get your point, okay? The war in northern Uganda, a region from which I hail, was last witnessed more than 20 years ago, okay? The region has had time to reconcile with itself. The region has had time to undergo rehabilitation. The region has had time to undergo through social and psychological support, okay, for about 20 years. The people have transformed. The people have been incorporated into society. We are speaking of Afghanistan, where even last week there was conflict, okay? So even when the people are not as bad as we could think, their insurgents and their conflict are very recent. Their wounds are still very fresh. So what I'm trying to say is that we should have been in a position where we have someone of the caliber of General Okech, who has had the experience of dealing with urban terrorism, to enable us as a country undergo through this transition of incorporating our Afghanistans. But you see, before, because I can see you're about to cut me short. Okay?
Yeah.
Just
to move.
Yeah, just give me 2 minutes. You see, Professor Nye, David Nye, of Harvard Law University, is a political scientist, one time said that, you see, decision-making by both leaders and society in general is influenced by a couple of things. 4, but I want to focus on one thing, which is the psychobiography, the psychodynamics that influence decision-making of both leaders and the people that they lead. You see, these errant voices, these dissenting voices about General Okech are coming from majorly a given class of people, which we have all been able to identify and appreciate. Now, what is the psychobiography? What is the psychodynamic of these people who are making such errant statements, who are making such dissenting opinions? You will get to appreciate that they are a given group of people whose psychobiography has tuned or has mentored them to think in some way.
Which group is that? Honestly, I've seen young people, I've seen old people, I've seen jobless people, I've seen legislators. So, you know, is there a thread that I'm not aware of that you know?
Of course, between me and you, we know that these are mainly young people.
But I've seen very old senior legislators in the House.
FDC made a tweet and deleted it later on. They realized their mistake. Okay? They realized their mistake. This is the political party, the oldest opposition political party. Okay? So let's leave the aspect of
oldest opposition political party?
The oldest opposition political party.
Under the NRM, maybe.
Yes. Yes. Under the NRM.
Yeah.
So they made a tweet and later on deleted it. What does that show you? So the point is that the errant voices, the dissenting voices, are coming from the young people, whose psychobiography, whose psychodynamics has made them, has programmed them to think in some way. The socio-economic inequality that exists in this country, which I am not shy to
say is
confess.
Not good.
Yes, it isn't good.
Okay.
That the inequality between the young and the old is very gross and very wide, and people are bound to be programmed in a way that makes them very radical, and their social fiber is bound to wear out, hence the death of decorum.
Thank you, Moses. Gloria, whereas he has concluded on the note of justifying the reaction of the young people, Moses, at the beginning of his submission, seems to say this is a mark of being ungrateful. For a man, distinguished character, man, military career, you know, we owe him appreciation and celebration. So we would like to hear from you. What's going on? Why are we like this?
Thank you very much. I was here thinking, I realized growing up, a lot of the older generation would tell you they really enjoyed the level-headedness that the UPDF reflected or was. And in my reality, I have come to a place where I have seen the police and then the assimilation of the military into the police. And there is no distinction anymore on how far the military goes or how far the police exists. And that is where we find General Okech in this mix. Him as an individual, very amazing person. For the institution he represents, we now have a contention given the November, because we are now coming back from the November killings and from the other different realities that have happened that have put the military at a point of contention with the public. So that is a context that we are in. But then I also want to understand that we come from a place where our value systems are deteriorating and degrading. When we were planning the national dialogue, one of the key issues we wanted to talk about was the value system. For us as Ugandans, what things do we agree on that these are our values and they hold us together as a people? And at any point that we find ourselves in contention of these values, then something is wrong with us as a people. And that is where we find the nervous system of Otafiire. And him as a person, on any day, everyone would tell you he's a very amazing person. For the institution he represents, whether he's a good man or not, we now start to have contention. Because there is a relationship the public has with the military that all of a sudden is stained with blood, violence, and killings. And violence is a language. And continually, we've seen the president or the NRM regime change the tactic of talking. You'll find a lot of, military vans packed. That's a sign and that's a message. That's a language a person has decided to speak. So you'll find military vans packed. They don't have to say anything, but you know the fear that they create in the people. And while the people may not be able to say, leave this place, or why is the military not in the barracks, but now they're actively within the civilians, they'll show it in ways that look like laughing at a dead person, which also is a question of value system. But then also it's a reactionary thing to the times. In absence of protest, people will find avenues to protest. So me, that is what I think. I not that I agree with it, but I understand it. That is where I come from.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time is fast spent. I would love us to go on and on, but now each one of us is going to have about 2 minutes to give us a parting shot. You have the choice to frame it the way you want. You could bring it as a way forward, as a piece of advice to the different stakeholders, as an action point for you. Some of you could even tell us what your organizations are planning to do or not to do in the wake of the decisions that were taken. And you could also advise the 54 disaggregated into 23, 16, and 15, what they could do, and one who wants to join the fray, how they could approach this. Yes, and I'll start with you, Eseru.
Thank you so much. My parting shot will be, first of all, I want to call upon all the civil society organizations not to lose hope. This attack right now should give them more strength. They should continue pushing government so that government ensures that they promote and protect the human rights of the citizens. They adhere to the rule of law and honor their democratic responsibilities. And also, those who are affected currently, I implore them to have more constructive engagements with government to ensure that they try to fix some of those things government is trying to claim they have not been doing. So, and I also call upon government not to continue clamping down the space of civil society, because there are stakeholders that are part and parcel of the nation building of Uganda.
Thank you, Abe. It was nice listening from you, Henry.
Yeah, thank you. From GLISS point of view, I understand that, of course, there are engagements happening between NGO Bureau and the organization, just like any other organization that has been affected. And I think that's constructive dialogue. We hope that government will appreciate, and if the issues they raise are sorted, we can really, government needs to understand that civil society really is a critical stakeholder in the nation building, in development, and witch hunting, targeting undermines democracy that we all want to have. And then it also needs, government needs to understand that civil society plays a role of checks and balances. So, but given the current trends, I think we're headed for difficult times, because we've had such kind of shutdowns at time of electioneering. But this has come at a time when we are just finished elections. We are starting a new term of office. So you can imagine what will happen in the build-up to 2026. But let's hope for the best.
Thank you very much, Henry. Gloria.
Yeah, my parting shot is that it can only get worse for it to get better. And it is then our duty to plan now that we know better and we are seeing the scenarios building up to 2026 or to the next 5 years, we can only plan better, organize better, and prepare ourselves for the future that's ahead of us. That's my parting shot.
Thank you very much. Moses? Yeah.
Thank you. A famous philosopher one time said that society proceeds by contradiction. So I don't think the contradiction between maybe government and the NGO fraternity is entirely doom in itself, like they're preaching. I think it's a point where we get to compare notes and balance the two arguments from both sides of the table and eventually find a common ground and move together. So I don't think all hope is lost, as my comrades seem to portray. I insist that the national resistance movement and the government in place is one that values the participation of NGOs. It's one that acknowledges their importance in socio-economic and political advancement of Uganda as a country. And whatever is happening maybe is backed up by empirical data and empirical investigations. So I know and I believe that the systems that are responsible for reinstating normalcy and returning our NGO fraternity and comrades into their normal business shall do its due process, and before we know it, we shall be back to normal. So I am very optimistic, I'm very hopeful that we shall return to normality. Then about the fallen soldier, I can only encourage us as a people to really look at this as a point of reflection, as a point of what do we stand for as a country, what values bring us together. I know that Uganda, for example, is a multi-nation state. We have many nations in the same state, but this in itself should not be a point of division, but rather a point of cohesion and a point of unity, because at the end of the day, we are all Ugandans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses. Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you, Henry and Abel. You have been a wonderful panel. You have heard from them. Our duty as the Youth Roundtable is to bring all these voices, hoping that you all stakeholders are listening and going to act on them. At the end of the day, we all want a better country. We have heard today that Uganda is a country without a coordinated central nervous system. We have had words like death of decorum. All these things cannot be changed automatically. They will take thought, reflection, they will take action, they will take collaboration, and that's what we want to inspire here. You have been a good audience. I implore you to send in your comments still on all our social media platforms to share and inform those who may not know yet of the weekly dose of sense, such that we together build a better country for ourselves and posterity. It's a goodbye from me.